Hi everyone, my name is Madison. I want to tell you a story from my life. I just had a moment when your fate depends on one decision, so I had to choose, and not in favor of myself, and it became a real test. In short, now you will understand everything, but in the meantime, listen, watch, and you can ask questions under my story. Do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course, write your opinion. I'll start with the fact that everything in my family was initially difficult. My mother married a man, my father left us a long time ago, and my mother and I lived together for many years. I grew up and adapted to this life. I even thought it would always be like this. Did I ever think that my mother would ever get married again? Of course not. She worked, I went to school, we rented a small apartment, and in general, everything suited me. So one day she came up to me and asked me what would happen if our lives changed. I didn't immediately understand her question because I hadn't thought so globally yet. I replied that I'd be happy if it changed, only if it was a positive change. Well, my mother said, "Daughter, I met a man and we fell in love." Yes, I protested at first. I didn't want to break out of my comfort zone. I behaved like a real egoist, showed my real character, and even left the house that day. The first thing I did was go to my friend, who is very wise, so I often asked her for advice. I wanted her to support me, to reassure me, but all she said was not to be selfish. Your mother is a young woman, and if she met a decent person, then why not build her own life? You happen to be her daughter and you're underage, so whether you want to or not, you're still going to be a part of her life. And why don't you let her be happier? She told me. Then I realized she was right. My mother did not leave my father. He left us, and now she has met a man with whom, perhaps, she will succeed. Why not? I came home in the evening. My mother was sitting at home all tearful. I said I was sorry, and then I said I didn't mind. She was so happy. Anyway, I met her boyfriend a couple of days later. He seemed to me quite decent, and I was not mistaken. He really won my trust, but the most important thing was that my mother was happy with him. 6 months later, he asked us to move in with him and proposed to my mother. My stepfather had a huge house because he lived with his mother. That lady was not very happy with us. She always wanted her only son to find a younger girl in his years than my mother and without a child. My stepfather immediately warned us not to pay attention to the old woman. She was too grumpy. My mother and I were mentally prepared, but still, it turned out that I did not fully realize what was waiting for me in the bad character of my grandmother. Since my stepfather and mother worked, they were not at home all day, and I came home after school and spent the whole day together with my grandmother. She insisted on calling her Mrs. White. She found fault with everything. I wash my hands with the wrong soap, I eat too much bread, I use too much water, I use up electricity, I don't wash the floors properly, I don't dust properly. At first I was silent about it, and then I began to tell my mom and stepfather, and he had a fight with his mom. It was a nightmare. There was a lot of swearing in the house, and I wanted to get out of there more and more, but I saw how my stepfather supported my mother, stood up for her, protected her, and it was nice. But when I began to ignore her attacks, she switched to attacking my mother. The old woman stayed in the toilet or bathroom for hours. She spoilt the food prepared by my mother, and especially threw her colored things into the laundry along with my mother's white shirts. She used to mess up, like accidentally knocking dishes off the table with food in them, and in the middle of the night, often walked around the house, making noise. My mother was patient. She didn't say anything, but I saw everything. Well, one day I came home from school, and I saw that my grandmother was picking through my mother's things. I asked her not to do it, and she kind of exploded. If it wasn't for you, everything would be fine. You're a real burden. Someone else's child will remain a stranger forever. You are someone else's blood, and you will never be my granddaughter, she shouted, and then went to her room. Her words hurt. Over time, I realized that there was no place for me in this house. If I was not there, she would leave my mother alone and let them live in peace. I seriously thought about her words, and one day, I left home for school and did not return. I asked to see my friend again, just for one night. Candy asked me to stay as long as I wanted, but I had plans to go back home to where my mother and I lived. I managed to save some money, sold my phone, so it should have been enough for the first night. Candy's phone didn't stop ringing all night, but I told her not to pick up because I knew it was my mom. I told my friend that I would rather live on the streets than destroy my family, Maybe then my grandmother would calm down and leave my mother alone. We ate dinner and went to bed, glad Candy's parents weren't home. The next morning, I had breakfast, packed some food, and drove to the bus stop. Sitting at the bus stop, I had a sandwich to eat, and then I heard a siren. It was the police. At the sight of them, I ran in the other direction, and of course, they caught up with me in the car. I was taken to the police station, where my mother arrived in 4 minutes. It was probably the first time I'd ever seen her like this. Red, tear-stained eyes, a haggard face. She was shaking all over, and when she saw me, she fell at my feet and began to hug and kiss me. My stepfather also hugged me tightly. He even cried and asked where I was and what I was doing all this time. I told them everything. My mother hugged me again in horror and told my stepfather that they should break up. "I can't risk my daughter's life. I'm sorry," she said. The two of us went to our old apartment. I saw how sad my mother was, but I didn't want to live with my grandmother. But in the evening, my stepfather came to pick us up. He wasn't alone. "I'm sorry. The child has nothing to do with it. I didn't know it would be like this," the old woman said. My mother listened to her incredulously for a long time, and she kept apologizing. It turned out that my stepfather refused to marry her friend's daughter, so my grandmother rebelled when he brought my mother and me into the house. But he talked to her, and she realized everything. Mom didn't want to go back for a long time, until I asked her to. I persuaded my mother to give my grandmother a chance, and she agreed. Now we live with her again, and so far, everything is normal. She has changed a lot, but I don't know for how long. But I think everyone deserves a second chance. What do you think? Hi, my name is Rachel, but you can call me Ray. I would like to share a story with you, but I don't tell it to many people because I'm ashamed and embarrassed. But now I've reached a turning point in my life when I've begun to understand that sometimes some things in life do not depend on us at all, and all we have to do is accept them or reject them. I hope for your support. Write your opinion in the comments. It is priceless for me. Let's start with the fact that I grew up without a father. I've always, as I can remember, had a mom. I didn't know any other relatives, and it was perfectly normal for me to live like this. My mother and I had each other, and we didn't need anyone else. As time went on, I grew up, and along with it, I had questions about who my father was. But at each such moment, my mother reacted the same way, with aggression. She always called him a goat and said only that he had cheated on us, but how he cheated, why, and when, she did not tell. I knew it was bothering her, so I only asked about Dad 2 or 3 times. The last time, I got a slap in the face. By the way, this was also the norm at home. My mother often punished me, and for various things. For example, a poorly washed floor, not neatly folded dry clothes, and once I washed her white blouse and my sweatpants. I swear, I didn't even see that her blouse was in the washing machine, so I got hit so hard. I didn't go outside for 3 days after that, because the bruises on my hands didn't go away. My mother beat my hands with a belt. Yes, she was always strict, terribly demanding. Each morning started with screams and ended with them too. And sometimes she screamed so much that she lost her voice, and then it was my fault again. I really wanted to be an obedient girl. I studied hard, always cleaned the house, cooked as best as I could, never went out with friends, as long as my mother was in a good mood. But every day I was waiting for the same thing. Screams, quarrels, screams, punishments. When my mother was particularly angry, she said that I was a burden that pulled her down, that if I wasn't there, she would be happy. How did that make me feel? Of course, it was terrible. I ran into my room after such words and cried all night. But then I calmed down and told myself that my mother was just tired. I still loved her, if only because she was the only one I had. Yes, we did not live very well. Sometimes it was barely enough to close all the accounts and buy food. That's also why we didn't allow ourselves much. But one day, there was a happy accident. Some unknown uncle came to our house. He called himself a lawyer and informed us that he worked for my mother's father and that he died, but left an inheritance in the form of a house for me, his granddaughter. It was a small house in another city. The lawyer brought a letter with warm words of regret that they did not communicate all these years, that he asks for forgiveness and gives us the property. I was standing in the other room at that moment and heard everything. How happy I was! Do I have a home of my own? I was so happy. I wanted to go to college, or at least move to another city and live, now that I have my own house. I was ready to squeal with joy. Mom signed the necessary documents and, without really saying anything, took the keys and slammed the door. I ran out of the room happy, wanting to hug my mother and congratulate us on the purchase. Then I got slapped again. "Why are you running? This is not your home. It's mine by right, and I will do what I want with it," she shouted. I begged her not to do anything wrong, but she said that I was underage, so she had the right to dispose of it without my knowledge. In short, my mother, as it turned out, held a grudge and resentment against her father due to the fact that one day they had a big fight and she left home. Grandfather didn't even try to stop her, so she didn't go back. Then she met my father, who, after finding out about her pregnancy, left, and since then, she has been angry with the whole world. I tried to persuade her not to sell the house, but she wouldn't listen. My mother sold it, along with my future, my plans and dreams. She felt that it was more important for her to close debts and loans with this money, so she did. And the rest of the amount my mother spent somewhere, but definitely not on me and not on the house. I have no idea what she did with it. The college that I had dreamed of for so long was also behind me, and at that moment, I realized that I no longer had anyone to help me. Summoning all the will in my fist, in my senior year, I began to look for places for a free education. I applied anywhere just to be accepted. I couldn't and didn't want to stay at home with my mother, because it became more and more difficult to talk to her every year. We didn't have a connection, and over the years, my mother and I became even more withdrawn. Besides, I couldn't forgive her for doing this to me, to my future. At that time, I was determined to leave and take care of myself on my own, because it wasn't safe to stay with her. That's what I did when I graduated from high school. I still got into a good college thanks to tests, although I was not physically active. I did not play sports. I do not have a creative gift, but I am smart. I studied a lot and always did everything conscientiously. I was accepted to the Faculty of Physiology, which I was happy about. I told my mother the day before I left. It was a terrible scandal, but I didn't listen to her. I just packed up and left. Ask me how I lived. It was hard for me because I didn't have much money and work, but I got out of it, got into debt, sold some of my things, and made some money over the summer. This was enough for me for the time being, but then I got a scholarship. In general, why I decided to share my story with you is so that you do not give up and do not betray your dreams. You know, not all parents are capable and have the ability to take care of their children. This happens and we either accept it or don't. For example, I could not accept it and did not want to. Since then, a couple of years have passed, and my life has changed dramatically, and I am happy. And as for Mom, she lives in the same way and in the same place, still works and doesn't want to see me. But I understand that this won't always be the case. She probably needs more time to digest the information. Oh no, in no case did I leave her, as she says about me and my father. I just ran away to arrange my future. Is that so bad? What would you do in my place? Share your opinion, please. I'm waiting for your comments and likes.